14 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I will bench this week. The first guy, Derek Carr of the Las Vegas Raiders. So Derek Carr, he's been hit or miss for the most part this season. 1 week he goes off, the next week he only has 10 to 12 fantasy points. And that's been the case over the last few weeks for him. Week 11 versus Cincinnati, 215 passing yards, a touchdown, and then throw a fumble loss. Week 12 at Dallas, 373 pass yards, a touchdown, and 21 yards rushing. And then last week where he had an amazing matchup versus the Washington football team that gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. He only had 249 passing yards and 24 yards rushing. So after a bad performance like that here, he goes into another tough matchup at Kansas City that's been holding teams down over the last month of the season. I know they give up the fourth most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the year, but Derek Carr, he's just not getting the job done. He's not consistent. And going into a Week 14 where a lot of teams have playoff chances on the line of making or not, I just can't trust him in this situation. And I have Derek Carr in the league, and I'm benching him this week here because I can't trust him, and I'm going with a different option in Cam Newton. The next quarterback I will bench this week is Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. So Dak Prescott, another guy here who's been inconsistent, but for the most part, the inconsistencies have been on the road for him this season. The last few weeks here for Dak, Week 11 in Kansas City, 216 pass yards, 2 wins, a fumble loss. Week 12 versus Vegas, great ball game, but obviously a home ball game on Thanksgiving. 375 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 rushing yards, and a 2-point conversion. And then Week 13 on Thursday Night Football last week at New Orleans, only 238 pass yards, a touchdown, and an intro. So right here, a lot of incompletions he threw in that game, a lot of balls that were off. And Dak Prescott, a guy on the road, I really just can't trust this season here. And right now, he's got 2 road games coming up at Washington and the Giants, 2 division rivals, obviously teams that know his tendencies and verse him twice a year. And right now, I just can't trust him. He might prove me wrong, but this week here with the track record on the road, I just can't go with him. If I have a decent option that I could put in, and the third and final quarterback I will bench this week is Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers. So Jimmy G last week had a decent ball game, but then a couple interceptions really bumped his numbers down. And this week, a tough matchup at Cincinnati that gives up the 25th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So Garoppolo the last few weeks here, Week 11 at Jacksonville, 176 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 12 versus Minnesota, 230 pass yards, a touchdown and an intro. And Week 13 at Seattle, 299 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 intros. So right here, it definitely could be a mini shootout with Cincinnati and the 49ers. But right now, in a tough, crucial Week 14, with many teams are fighting for playoff position or trying to get in, I just can't trust him because it looks like his ceiling right now is only 19 or 20 fantasy points, and his floor could easily be 12, 13 fantasy points. So right here with a tough matchup and his ceiling not being that high, I think Jimmy G's a guy you get away from and bench this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I would bench in Week 14 of the fantasy football season.